Chapter 3 Mother. After the funeral, when Masayuki and Nobuo, together with Tsune, the newly hired maid, began to settle down to their life together, Nobuo suddenly began to miss Tose. When he came back from school, the house seemed empty without her, and he was unbearably lonely. When he played in the garden and his kimono got dirty, he would glance up at the veranda, thinking, "Grandmother will be cross," and then he would burst into tears. He remembered many of the bedtime stories she had told him, how she had put him to bed each night, and how even if he had coughed just once in the middle of the night, she would get up and cover his shoulders to keep him warm. As time went on, only Tosa's good points remained in his memory. But as he puzzled over why she had got into such a rage and died, it seemed to him that he was to blame because he had mentioned the little girl, and his heart grew intolerably heavy. Another year had begun, and the remembrance service held for Tose on the 49th day after her death had passed. One evening, Masayuki was inexplicably late in coming home. While Nobuo was passing the time playing cards with Tsune the maid, they heard the sound of a rickshaw stopping outside the front door. Running out to see, Nobuo saw his father stepping down. Behind him, another rickshaw was just coming through the gate. Who can that be? He wondered. His father never brought friends home late at night. When the shafts were lowered and the front cover taken off, a refined-looking woman, her head covered with a hood, got down smoothly from the rickshaw. Seen by moonlight, her lustrous eyes were strikingly beautiful. As the rickshaw moved off, the woman put her arm around Nobuo's shoulders. "Nobuo," she said. Nobuo did not know what to do. He felt shy and at the same time annoyed. Struggling to free himself, he pushed against the woman's chest and made her stagger back. Without thinking, he showed the intense dislike he suddenly felt for both of them. Masayuki laid his hand on Nobuo's shoulder. "Well, let's go inside anyway," and led the way in. The woman turned to Masayuki and bowed ceremonially, her hands touching the tatami floor. "Thank you for allowing me to come." When they were in the living room, Masayuki beckoned to Nobuo and sat down beside him. "Nobuo, this is your mother." His voice was low and trembled somewhat. "You said my mother had died." Nobuo looked at the woman whose face was rather ghostly now by the light of the lamp. "That's right." The woman was about to say something too, but before she could begin, Nobuo replied angrily, "I don't need a new mother." Masayuki and the woman exchanged glances. "Nobuo, I am your real mother." As she said this, the woman drew close to Nobuo and took his hand. "That's a lie. My mother is dead," Nobuo cried, shaking his hand free. "She isn't dead. Look carefully at her face. Doesn't she look just like you?" Nobuo stared at the woman once again. Now that he came to think of it, there was a resemblance, and she was far more beautiful than the mother he had visualized when he looked at his own face in the mirror long ago. "Perhaps she does look like me," he thought, "but—" "Nobuo." The woman stretched out her hand and took Nobuo's. Her dark eyes were full of tears. "You were alive all the time?" Nobuo had such a strange feeling. It was unbelievable that his mother, whom he had so long believed to be dead, should be holding his hand and talking to him. "Of course I was alive, always thinking about you." She was about to embrace Nobuo, but he drew back. "If you were alive, then why didn't you live in this house? Your grandmother, you see, didn't care for Kiku. That's your mother's name." "She didn't care for your mother, so she sent her away," explained Masayuki. "Then, why didn't you tell me about it, father? Why didn't you let me meet my mother? Why didn't you tell me my mother was alive?" Before he could stop himself, Nobuo's voice faltered, and he was crying. Masayuki sighed deeply. "You've had a hard time of it. Grown-ups are liars. You tell me not to tell lies, but you and grandmother, you've told me a great big lie." Nobuo burst into sobs. In spite of the fact that with Tose he had not been utterly lonely, he had longed for his mother. Looking up to the sky, he had thought, "My mother, she's turned into that star up there." As he had watched other children with their mothers, he had thought enviously, "If only I had a mother too." Why hadn't she come then, when he needed her? Now the thought tormented him. "Nobuo, why are you crying? Oughtn't you to be glad that you've met your mother?" said Masayuki rather severely. "Don't be hard on him, dear. Poor boy, he doesn't know whether to be happy or angry. What else can you expect? The one who has suffered most all this time has been Nobuo." Hearing her say this, Nobuo was unable to control himself and began to wail loudly. He was overjoyed to think that this person who was protecting him so gently was his own mother. But it was not only joy that he felt. He was conscious of a sense of miracle that his mother, whom he thought had been dead for so long, should be alive and here beside him. It's all right now. You needn't cry anymore. Masayuki patted Nobuo on the shoulder. So now, do you understand? That little girl you met one day, she's your sister. She's called Machiko. Forgetting all about crying, Nobuo looked at his father. Is that cheeky little thing my sister? He thought as he recalled watching her scamper up the hill. Nobuo had often wanted a younger brother or sister. That was why he had been so fond of Torao. I bet she's a tomboy, that girl. At the very thought of this, Nobuo's joy knew no bounds. As he imagined himself taking her to play with him in all sorts of places, his heart leaped. But why did grandmother send mother away? He asked. The word mother slipped out naturally. Nobuo didn't feel at all embarrassed. I am the one to blame. It wasn't your grandmother's fault. His mother gently wiped away Nobuo's tears. How strange, thought Nobuo. Grandmother put her out of the house, but she doesn't say anything bad about her. As Nobuo was puzzling about this, Masayuki spoke. Perhaps you'll understand all the difficult things when you get older, but, you see, your mother. He broke off and glanced at Kiku's face. Kiku smiled gently and nodded. Your mother is a Christian. Your grandmother disliked Yaso, as she called him, more than anything else. I won't have a Yaso daughter-in-law in this house, she said, and told your mother to get out. Did you say Yaso? Nobuo suddenly looked scared. He did not know who Yaso was, but he remembered Tosa having said that he sucked human blood and ate people's flesh. He could not forget how she had told him that Yaso was an evil creature who did all sorts of frightening things, such as deceiving people by magical powers in order to destroy Japan. So, to Nobuo, Yaso was an unforgivably wicked person. When he heard that his mother was a follower of this Yaso, a creepy sensation came over him. In spite of her gentle exterior, he was convinced that she must be guilty of something terrible. He began to see why it was that his grandmother had told him that she was dead. Taking a stealthy glance at his mother, he felt that it was better to have no mother at all than to have a follower of Yaso for a mother. Yaso, Yaso, born in a stable! Ya, ya! Nobuo knew how the children sometimes made fun of the open-air preacher with this song, a parody of the respectful greeting to a royal prince. Ah, now you've come, the preacher would begin. Today I want to tell you an interesting story. No sooner had he said these words than the children would start to run away, shouting. Anyway, he thought, Yaso can't be any good. I don't like Yaso. Nobuo pulled a face. Masayuki and Kiku said nothing but looked tenderly at him. I'll be coming to live with you from tomorrow, said Kiku as she went away that night. Masayuki remembered the time when Kiku had to go. She was the daughter of a friend of Tosa's, and as Tosa favored her as a bride for Masayuki, he had married her. But after they had been married for a year or so, Tosa had found out that Kiku was a Christian. Tosa had called Masayuki and had given him a piece of her mind. Masayuki, didn't you discover before now that Kiku was a follower of Yaso? He had known. Masayuki had grown up to have liberal and progressive views, in spite of, or maybe because of Tosa's strict upbringing. He could not understand how Tosi should look upon Christian believers with such hatred. He could not understand her Yaso attitude. Yes, I knew about it. What, do you mean to tell me that you knew all along, yet thought nothing of becoming man and wife? Such a thing, in Tosa's mind, was far beyond the limit of decency and reason. There's nothing specially wrong with being a Christian. Masayuki had inherited his father's mild personality, and he had never answered her back or provoked her before. He knew too well that when she got worked up, there was nothing he could do to control her. But today things were different. Masayuki had to stand up for Kiku. Do you know what you are saying? How can you stand there and talk to your mother like that? This proves that you have been bewitched by Yaso, without a shadow of doubt. Tos was in a rage. Bewitched? There's no such thing in this civilized scientific age. I can't bring myself to think that Christians are particularly bad. Japan has always had Shinto and Buddhism. We don't have to worship a foreign god. Don't you understand what a shameful thing it is for a Japanese to do? Mother, this Buddhism which you believe in came from a foreign country during the Nara period, you know. Masayuki had had about enough. Masayuki, are you still answering me back? Whatever happens, I will not have a Yaso daughter-in-law in the Nagano family. Kiku, I want you to leave this house. That's inhuman, shouted Masayuki, glaring at his mother. Kiku hasn't done anything wrong. In that case, put your mother out of the house then. Masayuki, you throw your mother out and spend the rest of your life with this Yaso, Kiku. Tose was getting worked up. Kiku, who until then had sat with her head bowed, suddenly looked up. Mother, I beg you to forgive me. In those days there were many instances when even sons were disinherited and disowned by their parents because they became Christians. It could not be said that only Tose was bigoted. If someone explained, my daughter-in-law was a Yaso, so we disowned her, people would only say, well, there really was no alternative, was there? Kiku, when you asked to be forgiven, did you mean that you were prepared to give up Yaso? Tose looked doubtfully at Kiku. Tose had heard that people who had become Christians would never turn back, even if they were burned at the stake. As she expected, Kiku bowed her head and did not reply. Kiku, please leave this house. There was a note of finality in her words. Kiku turned pale. Masayuki broke the silence. Mother, you don't have to go so far. We have Nobuo to think about too. I will speak to Kiku myself. He put his hands on the mats and bowed. You! What makes you think you can make her listen? If you think you can influence her now, why didn't you speak to her before? Kiku, is Yaso so important to you? Even if it means leaving this house, aren't you prepared to give up Yaso? Kiku's stubborn attitude made Tose angrier than ever. She had hoped that just the mention of being disowned would make Kiku change her mind and ask to be forgiven, if only for the child's sake. But she just sat there without speaking, her head bowed, and Tose thought she was impudent beyond words. Whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. Kiku pondered these words of Christ, repeating them over and over again. I believe. Even if it means being killed, I cannot deny Christ, she thought. Kiku thought of Christ, persecuted and nailed to the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now Kiku felt sorry for Tose. A mother-in-law who had to order her out of the house, leaving her beloved husband and child, deserved pity more than hate. For Kiku, the thought of being separated from her husband and Nobuo was worse than death. For Nobuo's sake, she had many times thought of recanting and saying, I won't believe in Christ anymore. But even if she were to recant, it would be only words. It was impossible for her really to deny Christ. That would be to deny God and deceive her mother-in-law at the same time. But I shall have to leave Nobuo, and what kind of life will he have without his mother? She did not know what to do. As things stand now, there's nothing I can do but commit him into God's keeping. As she thought of Nobuo just learning to walk, she began to weep. Just as I thought, Yaso are all fools. You don't care even if you are parted from your own children, your own husband. It did not occur to Tose that in driving Kiku away, she herself was the fool. Under no circumstances could Tose forgive anyone of the upper classes who believed such a perverse religion. Mother, I don't want to divorce Kiku, began Masayuki. Silence! Kiku is the daughter-in-law of the Nagano family. As long as I live, I will not have a Yaso daughter-in-law here. If you must have Kiku here, then I will leave. Whatever will our ancestors think if I allow a Yaso daughter-in-law to remain here? Kiku and Masayuki went out into the room where Nobuo was peacefully sleeping and peeped at his face, neither of them saying a word. At last, Kiku placed her hands together and bowed to Masayuki. I am very sorry. Not at all, mother's a bigot. Please forgive her. No. It has all been my fault. Perhaps it would have been better if I had just said I don't believe anymore. Kiku, you stick to your convictions. Masayuki had often heard these words from his father. To his way of thinking, the tiny minority of Christians in Japan were worthy of respect. They possessed a sure faith which the present world seemed unable to receive. Although he himself did not possess it, he wanted to let his beloved wife follow it completely. Once mother has had her say, there is no turning back for her, he went on. But still, it's hardly likely that she will go so far as to make out divorce papers. So long as you leave this house, Kiku, you are free to do as you please. For instance, suppose you were to start living with some man. A man? I resent that. No, wait until I've finished. Supposing that the man were to be me, how would that be? What do you think, Kiku? Well, of all the things, Kiku was weeping. Tose would never allow her to take Nobuo with her, but Masayuki thought it possible that in due time Tose might let her come back again, when she saw how miserable her grandchild was. As soon as a house had been found for her, midway between Masayuki's place of business, the Bank of Japan, and the family home in Hongo, Kiku left the Nagano home. Her own family gave their unofficial consent. Even supposing that he had gone against his mother and kept Kiku in the house, Masayuki knew the Nagano home would no longer be a place where Kiku could live in peace. When Kiku left the house, Tosa had her last insult ready. I will not allow that woman to be called Nobuo's mother. Anyone who prefers this Christ to her own child has no right to be called a mother. So Tosa brought up Nobuo to believe that his mother was dead. What does it matter if it's hard for the moment? Time will show that this was the right thing to do. Since God is a living God, he will surely care for Nobuo too. With this thought, Kiku had been able to bear the separation for nearly 9 long years until Tosei died.